Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I am Jen. This is Adarian. This is the Let Me Introduce You podcast, number 14. We're talking about joint strengthening.
Yes, joint strength. That's my favorite topic, right? Every time somebody talk about strengthening a joint, I go, what?
I do know this.
How do you strengthen a joint?
So I did a little looking for some popular media headlines. We have things like 3 exercises to strengthen your joints. We have 18 exercises to strengthen your joints. Then we have research. There's a 2008 paper from the Journal of Biomechanics that says the relationship between joint strength and standing vertical jump performance. The abstract also states a matching simulation reproducing the actual jumping movement is generated by optimizing joint activation level.
Because how do you activate? What do you activate? Like, how are they measuring this? How are they measuring this? Like joint what?
Oh, the whole paper was so bad. But then I went looking. So what is a joint, right? Because I think some of the language around this is missing what a joint actually is. And a joint is very simply a point where 2 bones make contact.
Yeah, or anything, anything to make contact. Like you said, you have a joint in it, like the tables, the old tables that extend out.
Yes.
What they mean is a joint. If you're doing woodworking, when you join 2 things together, that's a joint. When you have a roof put up, they use those joint things. They use those little joint connectors. That's a joint. I don't. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
So joints can be a lot of things. They can be fibrous or immovable. Those 2 terms can be used interchangeably.
Right.
So, and that's like bones in your head, right?
Right.
They meet, but there's not much movement. Zero movement.
Right.
Joints can be cartilaginous or slightly movable.
Yeah.
They can be synovial or freely movable, which I think when we're talking about strengthening joints, those are the joints that people are talking about.
Okay. I'm still trying to get it to work, but okay. So,
and the thing with joints is they're comprised of bones and connective tissue, correct?
Well, I mean, well, yes and no. To me, yes and no.
Yeah.
Because like if let's take the hip joint. Let's take the hip joint, the femur, and you got this half plate over here, and those 2 things going together. That makes the joint.
Yes.
Now, just like we was talking about the other stuff, like with woodworking and things like that. How do I hold this joint together? That's the other part, is how do I hold this joint? Am I going to use glue? Am I going to use a staple? Am I going to use a nail to hold? What am I going to use to hold the joint together?
Yes.
So that's what I see. So I see the primary thing of the joint is the 2 bones connecting.
Yes.
And then I see what's holding the joint together.
That makes sense. And again, the definition, when I looked up what is a joint, that definition that came up was a joint is a point where 2 bones make contact. That was it.
That was it. That's it.
Like, that was as simple as it could be. So then you've got things that like this connective tissue, right? That like you said, holds the joint in the socket. And then you also have muscles and their tendons that cross a joint and resist forces acting on that joint.
Is that is that true? Because the reason I'm only asking that is because muscles are lax.
True. But when we go to move, right, isn't there tension in the muscles?
Yeah, there's going to be tension in the muscle, but is that for movement, or is that to reduce forces on the joint?
I always understood it as a way to transmit forces across the body.
So yeah. And so at that point in time, I think it's all in one.
Okay.
Where we're going to move, but at the same time, the tensioning ratchets up, because if you look at some of these joints, like the hip, you have this tissue around it, these ligaments around it that hold it in place.
Okay.
It doesn't, so it doesn't pop out, But then you have this muscles all around it, I think, to make sure that, as it moves about, it stays in place. But it's just how things stay in place, more than anything else. I think muscles is there once, because other than that, I mean, like, say you're sitting cross-legged.
Right.
And if you don't hold your knees up, what happens? They just flop to the side.
Flop to the side, yeah.
They just flop to the side,
Right.
And then once you pull your knees together, they tighten up, but they just flop to the side. Like elbow, it just flops down.
Right.
So I don't think they're there to resist the forces of the joint. I think that's what those other connective tissues are for, is to hold the joint together.
Okay, that makes sense.
So yeah, because other than that, not just going any place. I mean,
right. Well, and then when we're called upon to move, though, I mean, one of the things this particular paper said was that muscle strength is essential to the stability of synovial joints, especially during high stress activity, as well as for joints with weaker ligaments, such as the glenohumeral joint.
Right. Hold on a second. I'm back.
You're back. All right.
So I think so for me, you have they talk about the muscles and everything, but now that's where the conversation gets fun at, because like I said, you have this connective tissue. Like, for instance, you have this two things. Like, let's take a knee joint.
Okay.
You got two bones meeting up.
Yep.
So then you go, okay, you have these ligaments that basically keeps the two bones in place.
Right.
And so now, what do we have? We have muscles that move things back and forth.
Right.
So I think that becomes part of it, is look at it from that perspective of, okay, I got this, like you're talking about, even like the hip. I got this, like, say, look at the hip. You got this thing around, like a little socket.
Yes.
Then you go to the knee joint, you got these ligaments. You don't have a socket, you got these ligaments that kind of hold. So if you go to if you look at the elbow joint, and start looking at joint after joint after joint, you see that these ligaments hold the joint, these things in place.
Yes.
So that they don't slip out.
Right.
And that's what say, like, if I'm doing woodwork, I can stack that thing there until, I better put something down to secure it. And we've seen things like, woodworking or whatever things, those little puppet things, like you got to pop them in and you can swivel around, but you have to pop them out.
I do, yes.
But so we don't have that capability. Like a hip joint, it doesn't pop in and stay there. And there's this other stuff that holds it in place.
Right.
So now, once I start moving that around, it's pretty much will stay in place. As long as I'm going outside the range that it can go.
Right.
If it goes outside that range, I'm going to pop it out. But that's me intentionally trying to remove this thing.
Yes.
So that's what I look at more than anything else is like, okay, so now we get into this strengthening thing. So what are muscles for again?
Muscles are for to resist forces acting on that joint, behaving as a dynamic ligament, and muscle strength is essential to the stability of synovial joints, especially during high stress activity.
Yeah. So now we take that, like when do I need these? When do I need this stability?
Well, you need it when you're moving, don't you?
Well, let's take somebody who's like paralyzed.
Okay.
What happens to their joints if they stand up?
I've seen this. I mean, it's kind of crazy they don't collapse. I don't understand why, actually.
But yeah, but see what I'm saying? I mean, they don't collapse.
Yeah.
If they do collapse, the joint's still okay.
Right.
Like I said, the joint is still okay. The joint is still stable. Even if they,
Right.
the joint is
I
still
see what you're saying.
stable.
Yes. That makes sense. Well, and I looked up the definition of strength, which is the capacity of an object or substance to withstand great force or pressure.
So yeah. Well, okay, let's talk about a different topic. Let's talk about a different topic.
Right.
Pressure. That's a different topic.
It's a hugely different topic, which is why this idea of joint strengthening doesn't really go together, right?
Right. Because like I said, if and why, like I said, a person that said, like I said, if I have, if I have some type of trauma to my, spinal cord, whatever the case may be, and I'm paralyzed from waist down, like I said, if I stand up, I may wobble, but my joints are stable.
Right.
They don't pop out. They don't da da da. I just may not be able to stand up.
Got it.
Or up, I just can't move.
Okay.
But why? But what's going on? There's really no great pressure there.
Oh, and the pressure would be supplied. Actually, that makes a lot of sense. If the pressure is being supplied by the muscles,
right?
Then, okay, that makes sense.
So
do joints withstand great force or pressure, or do the muscles withstand the great force or pressure?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think what's happening is you have this kind of system of, path of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's how we move is based on the path of least resistance. So I have this great pressure here, and then I have reduced pressure here. Like for instance, a knee joint. Let's take a knee joint, where I have this pressure that stops the knee joint from flexing.
Yes. Okay.
And I reduce the pressure, knee joint can flex now.
Right.
So, or elbow joint, whatever the case may be, I have this pressure at the joint that stops it from flexing or stop it from having the path of least resistance. And then all of a sudden reduce the pressure, and I can only reduce the pressure on one side of it.
Okay.
I can only reduce pressure from one side of it. Versus like the ankle, I have pressure on both sides.
Okay.
It can move up because it can move both directions. A knee joint can only move, like I said, you can't go past 180. Elbow joint, you can't go past 180.
Right.
A foot can go up or down.
Mm-hmm.
But at that point in time, I would need pressure on both sides of this joint to make this work out.
Okay.
Same thing with the toes. Toes, I need pressure on both sides of the toes.
Right.
So those are kind of different in a sense about, and I think that's where we get into this thing of what is really supplying pressure. So when people say, I'm going to strengthen something, are they really saying they're going to strengthen something? Or they're going to try to supply more pressure.
Oh, that's an interesting, different way of looking at it.
Right, and I think part of the problem is with a lot of stuff, especially when it comes to joints, is it's a one-sided pressure.
Right.
We've been talking about it's a one-sided pressure, because what am I doing? For instance, if I want to curl, because you got to remember the bodybuilding world kind of runs the show.
Right.
And so if I'm doing a bicep curl, I'm only working one muscle.
Right.
And the muscle's going to help me bring the weight up. That same muscle going to help me lower the weight.
That makes sense.
You know, so at that point in time, that's a different story. There is no pressure in a sense at the joint.
Right. The pressure is around, it's around the joint, but not at the joint.
Right.
Right.
Right. There's only pressure on one side of the joint, which makes the elbow bend because the backside is the weak side now, or the path of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
But, and that's what we talk about. So let's put more pressure around this joint.
Uh-huh.
You know, let's go ahead and say, if I go ahead and activate the tricep,
mm-hmm.
activate the forearms, activate the bicep, now there's really pressure top side back and forth of this joint.
Right.
Now this joint's restricted from moving.
Oh, okay. Which is going to make it very stable, for lack of a better word, right?
Right. That would be stable. Now, sort of like somebody's in a handstand. There's so much pressure. That's why it's hard to do a handstand push-up. There's so much pressure at that elbow joint that there is no path of least resistance.
There is no. Even when I fall out of handstands and I pick a hand up to, catch myself, it's hard to pick that hand up, even though the weight is being transferred from it. It's just
right. So I think that becomes a different thing if we start looking at this as a pressure issue and not a strength issue.
Interesting. Okay. So I looked at some of the different joints that are kind of commonly discussed. And like one of them is the shoulder joint, which is comprised of technically the shoulder girdle is like 4 different joints, right?
Right.
And you've got all these muscles that cross and connect.
Right.
So if we're thinking about this idea of pressurizing versus strengthening,
right,
what would be the best way to do that, for instance, in the shoulder joint or in the shoulder girdle?
Well, I said, that's, handstand push-up.
Right.
Everybody, because even like now, if you're sitting down, we'll watch this. This becomes a fun part. So like right now, go ahead and just raise your hand up, and like really think about, where do you feel that movement at?
I feel it in my shoulder blade.
Okay. Now, go ahead and squeeze every muscle around the shoulder blade.
Then my arm doesn't go at all.
But now go ahead and now go ahead. Now take the tricep and bicep and squeeze them, and squeeze the forearm, squeeze everybody. Now go ahead and raise that arm up.
Okay.
Where you feel that at now?
I feel it more like through my arm and my upper extremity.
See what I'm saying? It becomes a different process based on the pressure, And so same thing. If I put my arm up like this here, and I just want to do this here, move my hand out in a sense,
Right.
No, people can't see this because, but all of a sudden, if I do this, see how the shoulder at the socket is moving?
Yes.
Now, if I tighten everybody up, look what happens.
It's just at the elbow joint that it's happening.
And the movement becomes stricter. It becomes a stricter movement now. So that's what you have to look at too. In some of these things, is like, what other joints do I need to put pressure at?
That's interesting. So for it to maximize, so if we look at an exercise or like an activity like running, for instance.
Yes.
There's total body tension that's occurring in the system, right?
Right.
I mean, there might not be, but then it's like you said yesterday.
No, you have, it's at a light level though. It's not at a heavy level. It's at a light level. Yes, at a light level. Yes, there's this going on and everything. And so then you go, okay. And even like when people, let's just take, for instance, I know people can't see this, but let's just go this way here. When people do a certain stability exercises, people can't see this. Some people will be able to see this.
Some people will be watching YouTube,
Yeah. So say I would do a certain stability exercise.
Okay.
And that's a weird word, stability exercise. So I think I got this right. I think you can see it.
And I'll walk everybody through what you're doing. So go for it.
So if I stand on one leg.
Okay.
See, there's no pressure.
Okay. So Darian's standing up on his left leg and he just lifted his right foot.
Which gives me the freedom to move. Because there's not high pressure there.
Right.
So then people do the exercise here where they're gonna reach down and touch.
Yes. So think single leg deadlift exercise or single leg pickup task.
Because guess what? they haven't added pressure to the system.
Oh, I see.
So because this movement, now I'm trying to stop this movement from happening, but I'm not trying to do it with pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So now all of a sudden, when you pressurize the system, guess what? That becomes a movement.
And picking up the object becomes easier.
Once I pressurize joint, then boom, now I got a problem. Because I pressurize this whole joint, any movement, and that's what people talk about, you need to work on your stability. No, you can't have it both ways.
Right.
You know, if you got to do this here, any slight movement is going to tilt you over.
Yeah.
So if you don't tilt over, you have to figure out, okay, maybe I don't do the ankle joint. Maybe I do the ankle joint loose, and I do the knee joint and hip joint and lock them up. Now, I get that there. But people don't like that because now you see they don't like certain things, so they try to get out of certain things.
Right.
So that becomes part of it. But for the most part, we move about because there's no pressure. If I'm walking, there's a very low pressure.
That makes sense. So high level athletes, like let's say like high level runners and high level gymnasts. Both of those activities require selective tensioning, essentially, selective pressure.
Right, selective pressure due to tensioning, yes.
Dependent upon what the activity is or the demands of the activity.
Right. Like for a balance beam, you don't see them wild, you don't.
Right.
You see them, they have to, you won't see this here.
Right. Because they also have to be able to move. This is the impressive part. And if they had too much pressure in their system, there would be no movement.
That's why you call it selective.
Right.
They have that control over it. So, but yeah, that becomes part of, even like for, something as simple as standing up, sitting down. Or like pistol squats. This is my favorite thing. I still can't do a pistol squat. But pistol squat is based on no pressure.
Right.
If I was going to do a pistol squat, I got to turn off all the pressure. All of it.
It's true. You have to kind of let the knee buckle and just.
No. That's not even a strength exercise. People call it knee strengthening exercise, but it really isn't. It's a no pressure exercise.
Right. Which again, if we're looking at this like in relation to athletic performance, it's not going to translate to anything.
No. So then you go, okay, now if I want to do that same thing, I would have to go, let me pressurize everybody to control my descent.
Right.
That's still not a strength issue. I just pressurized everybody to control the descent.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that's happening. But once you do that, but once again, once I do that, I lose this flexibility.
Right.
So like this here, if I just collapse, see this leg here, swings up, no big deal.
Right.
If I go pressure, this leg here now is stuck to me.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, we can't have it all.
Right.
Talking about joints, really what you're doing is you pressurizing the joint to restrict the movement at the joint.
Right.
In order to do that, I need more than just my quad muscle. If I do the quad muscle, that locks the joint out, but it can still bend.
Right.
I can do all I want to. This muscle, I can still bend this leg. If I don't want this to bend, I need a hamstring behind it. Now it won't bend. Now it's so all I did was, and then if I go down calf, now there's so much pressure here, it won't bend at all.
Right.
So all I did was change the pressure around the joint to make that joint restricted.
That makes sense. So again, if someone's running, let's say, and they want to create selective pressure, they could do selective pressure in like their hamstring, their quadricep, and their calf, right? It wouldn't be dialed way up. It'd be dialed,
You could use selective pressure, say hamstring quad, glute quad, calf hamstring, tibialis peroneus, calf. You can go any place you want to go as far as this pressure. Like I said, if I want to do the foot, just like in running, this would be a good demo here. Watch this. This would be fun. The foot, for instance, like I said, I got to do both sides of the foot because the foot can go both ways.
Right.
So if I'm running, the foot can go up and down.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people do this and think that's going to be it, but you still see the foot drops as people run.
Right.
Point this down, the foot, when I hit the ground, the foot's going to. So now what do? Technically, I don't want the foot to plantar flex or dorsiflex.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? I go ahead, lock up the calf muscle so that the calcaneus can't move. Mm-hmm. And then I lock up tibialis peroneus so that the forefoot can't move. Mm-hmm. Once you do that, now look what happens. Your foot will stay level as you run. But it takes that type of pressure around the whole joint to not let it move.
Got it.
Which is different than most people, because most people go like this here. Why do you think they do this here? Because they see that joint the joint's moving.
Right.
If I don't want that to happen, then I have to just boom. But guess what? If I go that way, then I better see what happens. If I do that, then I gotta get up here. So
right.
So the selective pressure, in a sense, is what's really needed more than strengthening of a joint.
Yes. And learning how to control the selective pressure, or basically call upon it when you want to.
When you want it, yeah.
Like, because you don't need it. Like we've talked about with pelvic floor, you don't need it all the time.
Right. If you're just walking around, you want the least amount of pressure.
Right.
The least amount of pressure to walk around. Mm-hmm. If I'm feeding myself, the least amount of pressure.
Right.
I want the least amount of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But once activities start ramping up, then I want to be able to call on this pressure to help me out.
That makes good sense. I was working on a drop in silks and she kept telling me I needed to tighten everything up. Basically call upon that selective pressure so that when I landed, I didn't bounce all over the place like a rag doll.
So yeah, and so that becomes part of it. And even like if I want to, like say I'm a baseball player, I want to field. So when I'm fielding, least amount of pressure. Like if we throw the ball, selective pressure comes in.
I see. Okay. Which that should give some of the listeners some ideas in terms of how to work on that, right?
Yeah. Because like I said, so it's something as simple as this here, and it just depends on what I want to do, where I'm, how am I gonna, create the least path of resistance where I want in order to affect the movement. And so I mean by that, if I'm in this position, I'm trying to field, so I want to do something. So I can stand up this way here.
Right.
Or I can stand up by saying, hey, now watch this. On my glutes, I'm going to put a lot of pressure in my glutes, which is going to stand me up. Mm-hmm. See, that's what people think that this is glute, but that's not glute.
Right.
What involved is all of a sudden, I'll put a whole lot of pressure back here. There's no pressure here. So the path of least resistance becomes this now. So if I'm squatting over to do something, boom, make that the path of least resistance. And that pressure on the backside forces me to go this way.
I see what you're saying.
So
and for those,
all of a sudden I'm here. Now the pressure makes me take that step. Most people will do this here. They would squat down and they would start picking up and that's when the problems.
Okay. So for those of you that couldn't see the demonstration, Adarian was in like a ready position to field a ball. And he said that there were a couple of ways to stand up. You could just stand up without pressurizing anything, or you could pressurize the back side of the hip, right?
Yes.
And the difference between the two is when you pressurize the back side of the hip, it's easier to actually be ready to throw the ball. You're going to be in a much better position to throw the ball versus if you don't pressurize the back of the hip, you have to kind of reset yourself, come on all the way up before you throw the ball, which is more steps.
More steps, yeah. Yeah. And so all I'm doing is altering the path of least resistance.
Right.
And that with pressure, okay, I got pressure over here. Isn't that the path of least resistance anymore? This is, so let's go this way.
That makes sense. Okay.
So in a sense, like I said, when people talk about strengthening, other than that, there's no way to, there's nothing at a joint to strengthen. There's nothing there to strengthen.
Right.
Or you see somebody doing a exercise, you go, but that's not strengthening and because one muscle's stronger, but the other muscle isn't stronger, you only got a much stronger muscle.
Right.
So in that sense, what are you doing at that point in time? Is you're creating a lopsided pressure issue, where you're creating a muscle on one side that can generate a lot of pressure, but the muscle on the other side can't. So when people talk about, muscles working, against each other, they're actually working together. They're working together in this sense to make sure there's pressure around this joint to control the movement pattern.
Right. Okay. I feel like that's a good stopping place for everybody to kind of chew on that. So essentially what we're saying is you're not strengthening a joint. You're learning how to create selective pressure
around the joint,
which can facilitate movement depending upon what you're trying to do.
Right.
Okay.
Because at that point in time, you're trying to put in effect the path of least resistance as how you're going to move.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll let everyone think about that. This is good. And in the midst of thinking, we have some things coming up, right?
Right. Quickly,
we have another round of book club. So if you are listening to this and you've read the book and you're a little bit confused on some of the concepts, book club is awesome because you'll have an opportunity to ask all your questions and be able to apply it to whatever it is that you do. And then we've got, what else do we have coming up?
We have the Bioenhanced Movement Summit in Las Vegas, January 12th and 13th.
Yes, we do. Yes.
And we have something important coming up on December 1st.
December 1st. Yeah. We're teaching exercises we're teaching exercises related to the concepts in the book. Let me introduce you.
On December 1st in Portland.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And then we have Amsterdam coming up in April.
And Amsterdam's coming up in April.
Yeah. So other things coming. And we have a new book release coming out soon.
We do. If the person writing, I'm pointing at me, can hurry up and finish chapter 9. It's close. It's close, y'all. So hopefully it'll be out by Las Vegas. That's the goal.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of cool things coming up.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And if you have any questions, comments, or anything of that sort, just hit us up via DM or email or whatever. We will respond. And yeah, until next week. Talk soon.